Here in southwest Louisiana, the Deepwater Horizon oil spill had its impacts on the Cheniere Plain, but officials say it was nothing compared to areas that lie west of us here in Louisiana. And not only did Louisiana lose lots of land, it also lost many of its animals. It all started with an explosion, and from that came a fire and gallons of oil spilling into the Gulf of Mexico. The Deepwater Horizon oil spill killed 11 people and blackened Louisiana's coastline for 87 days. It was ultimately named one of the worst environmental disasters in the United States. And while we know how the spill has affected our coastline and the many people that surround it, something else was hit hard that many seem to have forgotten about: Louisiana's wildlife.
Large whales in the Gulf of Mexico, down to insects and even microorganisms in marsh grasses, and everything in between, brown pelicans, sea turtles, bottlenose dolphins, bluefin tuna, pretty much everything that you could imagine out there was affected by the spill.
So 7 years later, are these animals still feeling the impact of the spill? David Muth with the National Wildlife Federation says yes.
They're still being affected because the breakdown products of the oil are still in the ecosystem.
Former Plaquemines Parish Coastal Director P.J. Hahn was there firsthand after the spill, working to try and save the pelican and bird population in the area.
It was heartbreaking because what would happen is we'd go out there and rescue a lot of the birds covered in oil.
But Hahn says many birds didn't make it.
They stressed out with the stress of being covered in oil, and then by the time we got them back to the sanctuary where they'd clean them and wash them and try to rehab them, most of those birds did not make it after that.
Hahn says now generations of birds have been lost because their homes have been destroyed by the oil.
The oil killed the vegetation on the island, and once the vegetation goes, the island goes with it. The root system keeps these islands together, and if you kill that root system, the islands break apart and fall apart. And so most of these smaller bird islands that were in like Cat Bay and in Barataria Bay are all gone today.
And as mentioned, dolphins are also feeling the impacts of the spill today. The National Ocean Service Office of Response and Restoration released a study and found that dolphins in Barataria Bay have had poor health, and there have been high rates of stranded or dead dolphins in the area. They have also found that many of the dolphins are still struggling to reproduce, and that the Deepwater Horizon spill is the contributor to the largest and longest-lasting dolphin die-off in the Gulf of Mexico. And while overall the wildlife population isn't where it should be, Hahn says the turtle population is stable.
None of the animals are really making leaps and bounds back into the books, but for the most part, the turtles seem to have stabilized, and you don't have the number of deaths that we were having during the oil spill.
After years of litigation following the spill, BP eventually reached a $20 billion settlement where a portion of that money will be used to help restore Louisiana's wildlife.
They're in the process right now of developing the projects that are intended to benefit the specific wildlife that was affected and the ecosystems that were affected.
And Muth says while these projects are in the beginning stages, making sure money from the spill helps these animals is a must.
Whatever that money is, whatever projects are chosen, have to address those wildlife injuries that were identified in the court case.
With help from the state's coastal master plan, only time will tell if the wildlife near the Gulf will ever get back to what it was. But officials hope that by looking into the past, it will ultimately help give them answers on how to sustain life in the future for Louisiana's wildlife.
To look at the underlying stressors on the system, to look at what was going wrong before the spill, so that we can rebuild an ecosystem that can sustain all of the species that naturally occur here.
Muth says over $8 billion from the BP settlement will go towards the Gulf. $5 billion is for expenditure in Louisiana that will go towards projects to help Louisiana's wildlife. At your service, Miranda Whittington, KPLC 7 News.